Hi guys, it's Arielle. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you guys are all doing well. Today is going to be the first of 3 videos since there are 3 seasons of Emily in Paris, where I'm going to be giving you guys my overall review and thoughts on the show. I'll be honest with you, I was so fed up and frustrated by the show that I just completely stopped watching 5 minutes into season 2. So I'm a little bit behind, but my mom has started watching season 3 and she keeps telling me things like, oh, this scene or this episode reminds me a lot of you and your life in Paris. And so she's picked my curiosity. I'm gonna suffer back through season 1 and 2 and eventually watch season 3 just so I can give you guys my overall feedback and my critique on how well Emily in Paris represents the life of an expat in Paris. Before we get into the video, I want to give you guys my qualifications, which I think will add a little bit more credibility to my review and opinion on this show. First of all, I've lived in France for 5 years, 3 of those years in Paris. I've worked constantly since I've arrived. I've done everything from English tutor to bartender to waitress to working at Chanel to working in the tech industry. I really do have a good understanding of what corporate life is here. I went to school here, I did my master's in the South, I have tons of French friends, I have a French boyfriend, and I spent a whole year living with a French family. So all that to say, I think that I can give a rather qualified opinion on this show. But that being said, please keep in mind that these are my own opinions and emotions. They're entirely based on my experiences here. We won't all have the same experiences, and you guys can definitely have a different opinion from me, and that is totally okay. For my review, I feel like I have written what can be considered an academic paper on this subject matter. I've got a lot of notes to go through. I'm very prepared. For my review of season 1, I've broken it down into 4 categories to help us evaluate whether or not Netflix and the show Emily in Paris accurately represents French culture, the life in Paris, American culture or the life of an expat in France, and the people, French people, men and women. I won't waste too much time giving you guys a summary of the show because chances are if you've clicked this video, you've already seen season 1. But as a refresher, Emily is a young marketing agent from a big company in Chicago, and when her boss falls pregnant and can no longer go on a big business trip to Paris, Emily takes her place. Once Emily gets to Paris, she has to adapt to the new life, to her new colleagues, make new friends, and really navigate all of the challenges that come along with moving to a new country. So to start things off with our first category, does Emily in Paris do a good job of representing the French culture? The short answer is no. Now, in order to evaluate this category as a whole, we're going to dive into 6 different subcategories. We have la bise, we have personality and enthusiasm, we have clothing, work culture, smoking, and sex and hookup culture. We'll start things off light with la bise, and specifically la bise at work. Now, I have never in my life of living in Paris or in France done la bise with my colleagues unless I have known them for at least 6 months and we've become friends, which means we go for lunches together, we hang out outside of work together. Until you build that personal connection with your colleagues in France, you are not running around giving la bise to everyone. And what's more is I would never do la bise with a superior. On the very first day, we see Emily do la bise with the founder of Savoir. It's shocking, to be honest. Pretty much every single work or professional scene starts with la bise. They do it all over the place with clients, with colleagues, on photo sets. It's just la bise all over the place. And realistically, you would never ever do la bise with a professional contact that you just met. In reality, just like North American culture, you would greet your colleagues with a wave or a coucou or a handshake if it's with a client. I also think that it's ridiculous that in this show, random people greet each other with la bise. When Emily first meets Camille at the flower stand and they get to talking a little bit, when they part ways, they do la bise. And it's just totally unrealistic to say goodbye to someone with this kind of gesture when you just met them, like a stranger off the street. And on top of that, keep in mind that they just met 5 minutes ago, okay? So when they go in for la bise and Emily goes in for a hug and Camille goes in for la bise, the way that Camille reacts when they accidentally kiss on the lips and Emily goes, oh, I'm sorry, and Camille goes, I'm not.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not. See you tonight, right?
Accidentally kissing on the lips when you're greeting or saying goodbye to someone is not like this sexy thing. It's definitely a mistake. It's definitely awkward. You can laugh it off, but it's not like a, ooh, you know? Now, my final critique of how La Bise is shown in Emily in Paris is the sounds. And I hate to be nitpicky or come off as a know-it-all in any way on this topic because realistically, I did not grow up in a culture that did la bise. But what I can tell you about la bise, it's a very gentle, subtle, delicate gesture. It's really just a touch of the cheeks. Like, it's not something that you're bringing attention to in any way because it really is just a normal, customary gesture when you're greeting or parting ways with someone. And so there's this scene where Kemi is greeting Emily and she goes, mwah, mwah.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Emily. Mwah, mwah.
And I just thought it was funny how they took something like la bise and really Americanized it in the way that it was portrayed in the show. Now moving on to our second subcategory, which I want to label as behavior or personality. Essentially when it comes to enthusiasm and to emotion, I do believe that Emily in Paris made an effort in capturing this difference, which is very much present. Without a doubt, North Americans or people who come from Anglophone cultures really do tend to be a lot more expressive than French people or even most Europeans in general. I myself am a very expressive person with my face gestures and my smiles and the way I speak and the volume at which I speak and the speed at which I speak. Like, I really do get that feedback from French people all the time that I do come off as a bit too much because that kind of enthusiasm energy is not necessarily as present in their culture or in their interactions. Another comment that I hear very regularly from French people about how Americans or North Americans behave is that our expressiveness often comes off as very fake. When we say things like, oh my goodness, I love you, or wow, that was just so amazing after the first time of meeting someone or the first time doing something, they don't find this authentic to them. They don't understand how you could love someone right after meeting them. I mean, do you really love that person? Do you really love the time you spent together? That's a very strong emotion, right? And so it's not fake that we feel a strong emotion or a connection to someone when we just meet them, but using words such as love or amazing or incredible maybe are too strong from the French perspective. On that note though, I mean, Emily definitely is guilty of this fakeness that the French accuse North Americans of being. There's this scene in a cafe between Emily and Kemi, which is right after Emily has kissed Kemi's boyfriend twice, and Kemi is sitting there telling Emily that they're good friends and she wants her to come visit her chateau and meet her family.
Since we're friends, we are. We're totally friends.
And Emily is sitting there just accepting this all, fully knowing that she has not been a good friend because she kissed her friend's boyfriend, yet she doesn't say anything and she just pretends like all is well. On a side note, I also just want to quickly add that in reality, this would never happen. A French person would not put so much trust and care into a person that they literally just met. Building relationships with French people take time and effort, and no French person is just going to whisk you away to their family's chateau like 1 week after meeting you. It's just really not realistic. So in conclusion, yes, the French are much more reserved, much more subtle than Americans, than North Americans. And while I do think that the show makes an effort to portray this, French people are definitely not as rude as this show makes them appear when they're faced with a North American who's very enthusiastic or energetic. Our third subcategory is clothing. And I don't want to dive too deeply on this topic because I think that there are people who are a lot more qualified than I am on the history of fashion and French fashion in general. But what I do want to say is that all of the outfits that we see these characters in, specifically Mindy and Emily, are unrealistic and impractical. Parisians specifically are known for their effortlessly chic style, and 80% of people are walking around the city wearing streetwear and sneakers, not bold designer prints and stilettos. On her first day at work, Emily shows up in a mini skirt, a crop top, and heels, and no one would ever wear this to the office, never mind on their first day at work. I have had many first days at work. I've seen many people have their first days at work, and I can tell you factually that that is not the kind of outfit that you are wearing to a professional luxury office. Another outfit that I thought was so comical was in episode 4 during the meeting between Antoine and Zimmer when they're discussing the perfume for Zimmer's hotels. Emily is there in a pink crop top and mini skirt ensemble, and it is just the most ridiculous, unprofessional thing that I have ever seen anyone wear. You would never, ever, ever wear that kind of outfit to a very important and key business meeting with your clients. And don't even get me started on Mindy, who wears heels to au pair and babysit young children. I know dozens of au pairs. When I first moved to Paris, my main friends were all au pairs, and I can tell you the main uniform of an au pair is sneakers and jeans. It is such tough work taking care of a child, never mind two. And no au pair in their right mind would ever wear stilettos to do that kind of job. Moving on to our next subcategory, which is work culture. The general laziness of French people and the lack of professionalism that is insinuated in the show is not just incorrect, but it's just appalling. In the very first episode, when they create this drama of the hardworking American who goes to work at 8:30 in the morning and the lazy French people who show up at 10:30 or 11:15 in the case of Sylvie, is really just an overplayed stereotype. Most offices maintain normal business hours to be able to help their clients, and those hours are between 9 and 6, I would say. There's definitely some flexibility on when you can go into the office, but from my experience in all of the jobs that I've had here, from luxury to tech, most people arrive between 9:15 and 9:45, and no one is showing up past 10. No one. And the way that they show every single lunch at work as sit down at a restaurant with a bottle of wine is also completely unrealistic. Most people don't have time to take their full hour-long break. You are running out of the office, grabbing a sandwich or a salad or a poke bowl, and either sitting on a bench for 15 minutes to eat it or bringing it back to the office and eating at your desk. This show just really overplays this false stereotype that French people roll into work at 11 and go for a 3-hour lunch at 12. I think it's just ignorant to peg French work culture in that way. I also want to clarify that it is considered just as unprofessional in France than it is in any other country to drink and get tipsy during lunch at work. Like, we are not all going out on our lunch break and ordering bottles of wine with our sandwiches. When it comes to lunch, I actually did find it realistic that Emily doesn't eat with her colleagues during the first few lunches. At my work, we didn't start eating together until the company put in like a little cafeteria space for us to eat our lunches. And also not until we became much more familiar with each other and we got to more of a friendly basis. That being said, if people were going out to lunch, they would 10,000% invite Emily. I remember on my very first day at my current job, people were at my desk at 10 a.m. inviting me to go for coffee with them. And during my first week, I constantly had people offering to eat with me. They really wanted me to feel welcomed, and this kind of friendliness and warmth and kindness is something that Emily in Paris just completely missed the mark on. Work-life balance is also something that I think this show did a good job of portraying. It's definitely true that most French people prefer to keep their personal and their work lives separate. This was actually quite a culture shock for me when I moved from Canada to France, because in Canada, I was just so used to becoming really good and close friends with my colleagues. And so when I first moved to France and to Paris, I didn't have many friends. And I really thought that I would make all sorts of good friends through work because you're connected by a common interest. And also the fact that you spend the vast majority of your waking life together. More so than with your family, your friends, or your boyfriend. So yeah, I was really expecting to become very close with my colleagues, and when I didn't, I actually ended up asking them about this and about their opinions on this, and they explained it really well. They said that they spend so much time at work that when the workday is over and when they go home, they don't want to talk about work or be reminded of work, and that's a big reason why they don't integrate work colleagues into their personal life. We see this in the show when Emily invites Sylvie to a dinner and Sylvie says, "We might work together, but we'll never be friends." And again, when Emily asks her French teacher to go for drinks with her outside of class, and the French teacher is like, "Sure, no problem. My rate is 50 euros an hour outside of class." And again, when Luke explains to her that she lives to work and they work to live. So this is all very true, and it's actually a big part of why I chose to work in France as opposed to Canada. French people really truly do celebrate life, and for the most part, their personal relationships, their personal life, their happiness really does come before a promotion or working overtime or earning more money. Our fifth subcategory of French culture is smoking. And I have to say, I do think that the imagery and the way that smoking is portrayed in this show is grossly over-exaggerated. Definitely smoking in France is a lot more common than in North America. And don't get me wrong, it's definitely annoying when you're out for brunch, sitting on a terrace, and all of the tables around you are smoking, ruining the flavor and the scent of your delicious brunch, or when all of your colleagues go out for a smoke break and leave you behind. But the archaic way that this show shows French people smoking is definitely ignorant. It is definitely not the norm for people to smoke indoors, and certainly not in a luxury marketing office. In the first episode, the founder of Savoir is there just smoking away as he's speaking with Emily, and it is something that you would never, ever see in a French office. That really is like a very old-fashioned way of portraying smoking in France. And yes, while a lot of people do smoke, most athletes are not there taking a cig break in the middle of their workout. And I feel qualified to speak on this because here in Paris, I am part of several different sports teams, and I can tell you that not only do 99% of my teammates not smoke, but the vast majority of them do not condone it and are very aware that it's bad for your health. It really drives me nuts the way that Emily is there taking a picture and posting it, hashtagging it French workout with this smug little smile on her face like she is just superior in every way. Now, our sixth and final subgroup in this category is hookup culture and sex, and I want to start specifically with affairs. I will say that from my experience, French people are a lot more keen to be committed or to get married than we are in North America. These values are just not as strong or as present in France. And I also do believe that cheating or affairs is discussed with a lot more normality in French media and between peers than it is in North America. That being said, most people are not having affairs, and the vast majority of French people would not condone that kind of behavior. It's definitely not a widely popular opinion to be pro-affair. In episode 4, Mindy tells Emily, "You haven't done Paris right until you've had one wildly inappropriate affair." And in episode 10, we have Antoine's wife who seemingly condones and approves of a potential affair between Emily and her husband.
I heard that you're in charge of Maison Laveau now.
It seems so.
I'm so pleased. I think you will be a much better fit for my husband.
Right. Professionally.
Whatever you want to call it. I approve.
Chérie, our table is ready.
Parisians are not all running around unfaithful and having affairs and cheating on each other and bragging about it and being proud of it and condoning it. I mean, I don't have the stats on extramarital affairs, but all of that is very much behind closed doors, and it's not something that's widely accepted or talked about in Paris. It's really not the norm that this show portrays it as. Same girl, same video, different day. My battery died halfway through filming this video, so let's pick up where we left off. My next point within this subcategory is that Emily in Paris makes it seem like every single French person is sex crazed. In episode 6, Emily wakes up to the sound of Gabrielle and Camille doing it. And also in episode 6, Emily magically meets this French man at a bar and has a couple drinks with him and then takes him home. And I don't have anything against hookups, and I'm not saying that they don't happen in Paris, but this magical, dreamy moment of meeting the French romantic man of your dreams at a bar and then taking him home is really just heavily playing off a cliche that Paris is the most romantic and sexy city in the world. Then probably the most concerning is in episode 8 when Emily sleeps with Camille's underage brother and not a single person bats an eye. What's worse is that once the family finds out, Camille's mother takes Emily to the side and you have the impression that maybe she's gonna scold Emily for having taken the virginity of her underage son. But no, not at all. Her main concern was whether or not her son was good in bed. Not that a 29-year-old just slept with her 17-year-old son.
Stop talking, please. I don't care about any of that. I need to know, is my son a good lover?
And finally, in the workplace, all of the sexual advances made towards Emily are not only unacceptable, but they would be deemed very unprofessional in France as with any other country. We have Antoine who sends Emily lingerie at work and tells her that this is the French way. In episode 9, Emily asks her client, Mathieu, if he can arrange a meeting between her and Pierre Cadeau in order to pitch an idea. And Mathieu tells her that Pierre is busy, but that he can meet her for a drink at the art gallery after work. Also in episode 9, when they're discussing the mattress campaign, Luke tells her his wonderful idea of bringing the Eiffel Tower to bed. Not the building, the sex position. We really need to remember that not only are these professional relationships between colleagues and clients, but Emily does not know these men nearly long enough for them to be sending her such intimate gifts, for them to be telling her such vulgar things, or to be offering her to pitch ideas over a glass of wine. This idea that the French, and notably French men, cannot behave themselves in a respectful and professional way at work really advances the fact that Frenchmen are pigs, and that sexual harassment is totally permissible in France. Moving on to our next category, we'll talk about our American protagonist and how her culture is shown throughout this season. I think that my biggest problem with this show is that Emily, or the American perspective, is constantly being shown as superior to the French. And this blows my mind because Sylvie, who is French, who speaks French, and who has decades and decades worth of experience in the field, is constantly being outplayed and outsmarted by Emily and her brilliant ideas. In episode 1, Luke sees Emily on his way home and sits down beside her to tell her that her ideas are more new and better.
Your ideas, they are more new. Maybe they're better.
And this is hilarious to me because at this point in the show, Emily has not actually produced or shared a single idea. In episode 2, Emily's brilliant tweet for the Vaja Jeune campaign is noticed and retweeted by the president's wife. In episode 4, Antoine and Sylvie, who are two grown and mature adults, are having a disagreement in Sylvie's office. Emily hears this and runs in and saves the day. She saves the client. And if that wasn't enough, once Emily leaves, Antoine turns to Sylvie and goes, "Smart girl."
Smart girl.
I want you to think of a time when your boss was having an important meeting with a superior or with a client. Would it be appropriate for you to barge in and take over the conversation? No. So why is this rude and unprofessional behavior completely glorified when Emily does it? In episode 7, when Emily is at an influencer event, she has to post to get Olivia Thompson's attention. And she's the underdog, she's the American, she has the smallest follower count. But despite all of these challenges, Emily's post is the most creative, the most engaging, and Thompson immediately calls to meet with Emily. Apparently, Emily had the most brilliant idea, so much so that Olivia wants to make her the brand ambassador. Then, when they meet for lunch and Emily suggests that the brand rejoins the Savoir agency, Olivia flat out says no, and that Savoir is an overpriced, expensive dinosaur. Which again is a jab at the French, calling their ideas passé, while Emily is there to save everyone with her new and modern and intelligent approach. I could honestly go on and on because in every single episode, Emily manages to save the day. But the worst offender, in my opinion, is when Emily works with the client Pierre Cadeau. In episode 6, Emily is, of course, clever enough to get into Pierre Cadeau's private box. Of course, there is no security, there's no one on standby to prevent this from happening. And not just that, but she manages to charm this very intelligent and high-profile designer with a story about Gossip Girl. So much so that Cadeau chooses Savoir as his marketing agency. In episode 7, Pierre Cadeau chooses Emily personally to work on the campaign for his brand. And then, when Emily brings a high-profile American actress into the store, Mathieu, his son, is wildly impressed with Emily's capabilities. Then, in episode 10, when Pierre Cadeau becomes manic, he demands to see Emily and Emily alone right away.
It's despicable. He is manic. Oh, and he wants to see you now.
In this episode, we also have the challenge of finding a venue for Cadeau's show because he forfeited his previous space to Gray Space. And this scenario absolutely drives me crazy because, again, we have Sylvie, who has decades worth of professional experience, who is intelligent enough to manage a luxury marketing agency in Paris. She can't come up with a solution. She's there completely overwhelmed, has abandoned all hope, but it's Emily who turns up and tells her, we just need to change our perspective. Again, Emily has the most brilliant idea. It's wildly successful. Pierre Cadeau's name is plastered across all of the media, and the show ends by Matthew saying,
You are a genius.
I know I'm coming off as dramatic, but it really drives me up the wall that in every single episode of this season, Emily comes in and saves the day, and she faces very little pushback. She always succeeds, it's just not interesting or realistic for the viewer. I think a more effective and interesting storytelling strategy would have been to strike a balance between what the French culture and the American cultures can both bring to the table. I just think it would have been more interesting if these two cultures worked together and learned from each other to make these really innovative and avant-garde marketing campaigns, as opposed to Emily, who comes in and who saves the entire offices with the American perspective. On top of the American perspective narrative, Emily as a protagonist really frustrates me because no matter what, in every single episode, Emily is shown as superior. For starters, everyone's world seems to revolve around Emily. There are tons of scenes where Mindy and Camille meet Emily for coffee before Emily's work. It's like these other girls do nothing, they don't have other important things or jobs to do. Even when Emily meets Camille for the first time at the flower shop, it's like a Tuesday morning or something. And Camille has absolutely nothing better to do other than talk with Emily and go for a stroll and invite her to a party and go for coffee. It's like, doesn't Camille work? In episode 6, Emily texts Thomas to see if he'll go to the ballet with her in the evening, and within 1 second, Thomas has answered, yes, absolutely. And it's like, 1, is Thomas on his phone 24/7? Like, does he not maybe have a job that he's doing? And 2, are we saying that Thomas is 100% at Emily's disposal? Like, he doesn't have anything else going on in his life other than just waiting there patiently for Emily to ask him on a date? These might seem like very annoying or nitpicky critiques, but all together they paint this very unrealistic picture of what it's like to be an expat or an immigrant in Paris. Nobody is dropping their life or their plans at the sound of a text message from you. And we've already talked about how Emily is the best at her job, but she's also the best at giving relationship advice. Emily is constantly judging the affair between Sylvie and Antoine, and in episode 7 straight up tells Sylvie that instead of the romantic choices that she, a grown woman, is making, she could instead work towards having 100% of another person. And Sylvie dramatically responds that she doesn't want 100% of another person and she doesn't want another person to have 100% of her. And it gives the impression that the American perspective of relationships is rational and authentic and loving, whereas the French perspective is emotionally immature and impulsive. Something else that I want to point out is that as we near the end of the season, Camille is shown as more and more of a bad girlfriend who doesn't listen to Gabriel or doesn't support him in his dreams, and it leads us to the logical conclusion that maybe Gabriel and Emily are a better fit. Compared to Camille, Emily is patient and attentive, and she listens to Gabriel and she looks at his pictures with total enthusiasm, telling him that his restaurant in Normandy is the perfect place for him, despite the fact that they have only known each other for a few weeks. Overall, it just really pushes forward this narrative that when it comes to relationships and partnerships and marriages, the Americans have it right, and it's just another thing that the French can learn from Emily. A final point that I want to make, which I know has already been critiqued to death, is the fact that Emily makes zero effort to learn the language outside of attending 2 French classes, and the reality of the situation is that Emily would struggle. Not only is it a very big challenge for immigrants and expats to live in a country where they don't speak the language, but it's also just as challenging and time-consuming to learn a new language, and this struggle is not reflected in any way throughout the show. Of course, your colleagues and French people that you meet will be kind and they'll speak to you as much as they can in English, but at the end of the day, we're all more comfortable speaking in our mother tongue. There are just so many unrealistic scenes where French people are speaking to each other in English, when in reality, they would be speaking to each other in French, and Emily would feel very lost. Moving on to our second to last category, does the show accurately represent life in Paris? Are you going to be surprised when my answer is not really? There are just so many ways that this show fails to realistically showcase the city of Paris. For starters, Paris is an extremely busy city, from the streets, to the metros, to the sites, to the restaurants. Every single place is jam-packed, especially during the warmer months when the show was filmed. In the first episode, when Emily meets Mindy, she's having lunch in the Palais Royal Gardens, which appears to be completely empty, and I can tell you factually that this is where everyone in the neighborhood eats their lunch during the summer months. It's so rare to find an empty bench during the lunch hours over the summer that people are happy just sitting on the sandy ground to eat their lunch. And again, in episode 5, when they go to eat at Maison du Rose in Montmartre, the streets are empty, and there's even an empty table on the outdoor patio. This is like the most touristy place ever. It is so chaotic and so busy. I really hated the scene in episode 3 when Emily is jogging along the Seine and a grown man pees in public. The city of Paris is not covered with these red urinals that you see in Emily in Paris, and I actually quite often go to that area where Emily was jogging and have never seen that red urinal in my life. So I think they just put it in temporarily for the show so that they could make some unfunny joke about French people peeing in public. On this note of bathrooms, the whole drama between Emily and her plumber when her plumber comes to fix the shower and throws a fit because he doesn't have the right parts because the pipes are too old. Like, you guys, all of the buildings in Paris are old, okay? All of the buildings, all of the pipes. Any Parisian plumber is gonna know what to expect. They're not gonna throw a tantrum like this. This whole scenario really just reinforces this idea that French workers are lazy and incompetent. I think it's also pretty ridiculous in episode 6 when Mindy says that it's Paris, no one will judge you for doing nothing, it's practically an art form here. Paris is a big, bustling city, okay? People are running around, they've got places to be, people to see, and it's actually very overwhelming because you feel like you just can't catch a breath living in the city. And on that same note, like I've already explained, Emily's first meeting with Camille is extremely unrealistic because Camille wouldn't just be walking about, strolling around, nothing to do. She would be running around trying to catch the metro like every other Parisian going to work at 9 a.m. in the morning. And finally, probably the most important way that this show failed to represent life in Paris is the representation, or lack thereof, of diversity and people of color. I know this has been heavily criticized, and from what I've heard, they've tried to fix this in season 2 and in season 3, so I won't harp on this one for too long, but I will say that in the city of Paris, about 110 different nationalities are present. Paris is a multicultural hub, and this diversity of people and races and cultures is a big part of what makes living in this city so interesting and exciting and special. This is completely ignored in the show, and it's crazy because 1 out of every 5 people that live in Paris is an immigrant, yet the vast majority of characters in the show are white and French. All of Emily's love interests are white, all of her colleagues, with the exception of 1, are white, all of the clients are white, the plumber is white, the building manager is white, the servers are white, all of the high-profile characters like the designer and the actress are white. It really is a very unrealistic and tone-deaf representation of Paris, which fails to portray the racial diversity that is characteristic of the city and should be celebrated. Speaking of poor representation, Emily in Paris does no favors to French people who are consistently labeled as lazy, rude, and sexually inappropriate. Episode 1 starts out really strong with all of Emily's colleagues completely excluding her from lunch. Oh well, I mean, as per Mindy in episode 3, that's the French way. They are very disagreeable. I mean, of course, there are rude people in France just as there are rude people in every other country, but this is not a defining characteristic of all French people. In this show, Frenchmen are shown as having a one-track mind for sex. They are inappropriate, and their behavior is often borderline sexual harassment. At work, her male clients are sending her lingerie, and the only marketing ideas that her male colleagues can come up with are sex-related. Outside of work, all men are cheaters. We have Antoine, who's cheating on his wife with Sylvie, and we have Gabriel, who's cheating on his girlfriend with Emily. The way that Frenchmen apologize is through sex. For example, Antoine, who sends Sylvie nibble rings after their argument. And the way that Frenchmen resolve conflict is also through sex. For example, in episode 9, Mathieu's response to the PR disaster is what? To make love. Frenchmen have no respect for boundaries, like Camille's dad, who knows Emily is arriving and chooses to wait outside naked. I think I would agree that French people in general are a little bit more comfortable with sexuality and nudity than we are in North America, but not to the inappropriate point at which this show brings it to where Emily feels harassed. I also think that there was no memorable case where a French man was shown as genuine and respectful towards women, and this is a huge problem because that is how the vast majority of Frenchmen behave. French women, on the other hand, are portrayed as bitchy, for lack of a better word. Through the entire season, Sylvie is constantly being rude to and ostracizing Emily, completely failing to treat her like the competent 29-year-old woman that she is. I mean, it was absurd when Sylvie started calling Emily la plouc, which means slob or the hick. It is not normal for your manager in France to call you by a rude or offensive name. It's obnoxious and it's catty, and it's not even remotely close to how you'd be treated by a female colleague in France. In episode 1, we have the boulangère who corrects Emily's grammar when she's asking for a pain au chocolat, And in episode 4, we have the florist who pretends not to understand that Emily is asking to buy a bouquet of flowers. You have to think about how many tourists or Anglophones visit Paris. Like, no commerce would have the time or the desire to correct every single foreigner's mistakes. I mean, if you are any business selling something in Paris, you have to be patient and kind and tolerant due to the sheer volume of Anglophone and tourist customers. In episode 8, we're introduced to Camille's mother, who's completely taken aback by the fact that Emily would love a tour of their chateau, and instead of welcoming her daughter's friend into their home, she completely disregards Emily and casts her to the side, telling her that if she wants a tour, she can go to the winery tour in 30 minutes. It's just so incredibly rude and unhospitable and a complete warped perception of French women and families. Similar to the men, outside of Camille, there are no French women who are portrayed as kind, caring, patient, friendly, and this is just so deranged from reality. To summarize, Emily in Paris season 1 completely missed the mark. They rely on cheap and often false stereotypes for failed comedic effect and storytelling. The show is not realistic, and because of this is very hard to watch. The show lacks cultural diversity and is not representative of what it's actually like to live in the city of Paris. Emily is a frustrating protagonist who faces very few challenges and no pushback, and always seems to come out on top despite having significantly fewer years of experience and does not even speak the language. Overall, this was painful for me to get through, and I hope that season 2 does better. That is all. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know your opinion down below in the comments, and I will see you in my next video.